true insights to his life. So come on up, Russ.
At Westberg.
Thank you, Joyce. My father figures prominently in my poetry for reasons which will become all too clear. And I pulled those poems together into a cycle, which I call the Daddy Poems. And yes, it's as Freudian as it sounds. And so I thank you, Joyce, for generously giving me the time to read this more or less in its entirety. The first period was around 2000 when I was struggling with crippling depression and anxiety and looking for the roots of that through poetry. And then the second part of the cycle was written in the last 4 years while my father's health was failing, and I was learning things about him and about his relationship with my mother that I never imagined. And I brought a few copies of tonight's presentation. If you would like one, you're very sick and you need professional help.
I still want one.
Signed copies are available for $5, and unsigned copies are available for $10. So this is going to take about 30 minutes. Our usual break will come in the middle of the presentation, so you can call your therapist. And with that, I'm going to plow through it as efficiently as possible with a minimum of commentary and let you gather the backstory from the poems themselves. And to begin, this poem is called Villanelle. It's the first of 3 villanelles, and I spell it Villanelle. I don't know who I'll be from day to day, a world beater or a hapless lamb. I always feel like this when I'm this way. I limit my remarks to pleasantries for fear you'll find out who I really am. I don't know who I'll be from day to day. I smile on cue, take pains to meet your gaze, the better to perpetuate the scam. I always feel like this when I'm this way. I must be good, else I incur the lash. Thus, my authentic self becomes a sham. I don't know who I'll be from day to day. Despite my pains, the lash comes anyway. He tells me I should take it like a man. I always feel like this when I'm this way. There is no there, Gertrude Stein would say. I'm loved for what I do, not who I am. I don't know who I'll be from day to day. I always feel like this when I'm this way. This is called Song Cycle. It's the only one of the bunch that's addressed neither to my father or to myself, but it's addressed to my brother who died of AIDS in 1986. It's called Song Cycle. I wrote these songs to understand your crucifixion. I like to think you were there when they premiered. It is a useful myth when death renders stillborn our good intentions. I wanted to sing them to you, but you were terminal by then, and I was afraid you wouldn't understand. I was the last one in the family to find out. I was still Catholic then, and you were afraid I wouldn't understand. Father is the one who didn't understand. Father is the one whose eulogy judiciously omitted any mention of your Buddhism or homosexuality. Father is the one who said a rosary every day for your soul. But you told him before you told me because you needed the money. That last year, the only one you let me have, shimmers in my mind like stop-action film. I'll never forget how you relished the pizza with everything, even though it felt like battery acid going down. Your gullet eaten up with cancer like your face. If I'd had that kind of courage, you would have heard these songs. You would have loved them. Thank you. This is called Father. You never stopped wishing you had become a monk. You stopped making love to my mother when she could no longer get pregnant. You collected and devoured all 10 volumes of Daniel Rope's The History of the Church. I wear your rabid Catholicism like a scar. I wear your fervid, febrile fundamentalism like a hair shirt. I take off my scapular when I make love to my mistress. I write blasphemous poetry. I play the organ every Sunday and slip out for a cigarette during the sermon. The prie-dieu I built in a spasm of piety is now a guitar rack. I haven't been to confession in 10 years. I continue to receive communion every Sunday. I'm the only person in the Western world under 60 who thinks this is a mortal sin. Who cares whether it is a mortal sin? Who even uses the words mortal sin? I stay in the church so I can secretly spit in its face. Your face. Thank you. This is called He is Calling Elijah. I am the boy who sits in the attic reading encyclopedias for hours. I am the young salesman who sits on his sample case all day, deep in the woods where no one can see him. I have no friends. Friends fall into two categories: those who don't understand depression and those who are more depressed than you are and have to tell you all about it. I have a girlfriend. She has flesh on her bones and takes care of all my needs. She loves my poetry. These are the qualifications. Once a year in October, I lie in bed crying all day. I do not know where it comes from. It's the anniversary of my divorce. It's seasonal affective disorder. I'm reliving my infancy when my parents let me cry myself to sleep. One theory is as good as another. I cannot remember my childhood. I've blocked it out. My children do not remind me of my childhood. My children remind me I am old. My children make me reenact the beatings my father gave me. I have always been old. Here's a funny story. My father was telling my brother-in-law what it was like building his architectural practice. He said, "I don't think the kids suffered from my being gone all the time. One of the few memories I haven't blocked out is of Dad and me staying up all night working on my science project. It won a gold medal at the state science fair. I have spent the rest of my life putting everything off until the last minute, trying to get Dad to come home from the office and help me with my science project." Someone who cannot feel pain can put his hand on a hot burner until his flesh sizzles. I cannot feel pleasure. I am missing the instinct that drives my cat to nuzzle me until I pet her. Imagine you're a rat, running a maze over and over with only an empty bottle waiting for you. My twin died when I was 3 weeks old. My mother shunned me, blamed me for killing him. Murderers do not deserve to experience pleasure. Here's another funny story. My family went to a child psychiatrist while I was in prep school. One time they took me along when I was home on break. Afterward, the psychiatrist told my mother I was the one who really needed help. I asked my mother why she didn't get me some help. She said, "I don't know, I guess you just went back to school." Even if a coin comes up tails 100 times in a row, the odds of it coming up heads are still 1 out of 2. Hope is the ultimate lunacy. Hope is doing the same thing, expecting different results. The only reason I continue to swim through day after day of tapioca pudding is the thought of my daughter discovering my body. The Catholic philosophers have a term for not feeling any consolation when you pray or do good works. They call it spiritual aridity. All the great saints go through it. I wonder how many cases of undiagnosed clinical depression are running around in heaven. This is called the coat. The memory of that coat flies in the face of my most cherished myth, that I grew up with an absentee father. I made him buy it for me in Sacramento. It was a hideous green and white sport coat. I never wore it once. It hung in my closet for years, silently castigating me for my greed. But don't you see, he drove me to college once, all the way from Portland to LA. And the only memory I have of that trip is buying that stupid coat. Thank you. This is kind of an attempt to do a Lewis Carroll thing. This is called What Was So Bad About That? My dad was a troubled and violent man and prone to excesses of drink. He'd come home from work and he'd open a can. He'd collar me no matter how fast I ran, and then with some leather my hide he would tan. What was so bad about that, do you think? What was so bad about that? My dad, a fanatical Catholic he, his rosary ne'er far away. We sang at the piano when I was but 3. Trying to sound British, I sang God Rest Ye. He suddenly paddles me over his knee. What was so bad about that, would you say? What was so bad about that? My dad was determined to bring me up true, teach me in the way I should go. He caught me exploring his toolbox at 2. He chased me around, and the next thing I knew, face first through the living room window I flew. What's so unusual about that, do you know? What's so unusual about that? Mere child of 18. I admit it was dumb. I failed to give father the head. From clear out of nowhere, the roundhouse did come, boxed me in the ear, punched a hole in the drum. Wherever I thought, are those stars coming from? I'm sorry, I'm deaf. What was that you just said? I'm sorry, I'm deaf. What was that? I know it appears that I'm way too obsessed, that I haven't let go of the past. My father meant well, he was doing his best. He worked like a dog, keeping us fed and dressed. I've spent my whole life full of rage and depressed. What is so bad about that, may I ask? I ought to be grateful, not taken to task. So I spend all day sucking my thumb from a flask. What is so bad about that? Thank you. This is called Treating Myself. I wanted an ice cream treat before I started to write. I really wanted a Klondike Crunch or a Blue Bunny chocolate dipped chocolate vanilla swirl. I looked in the freezer and there was this box with one generic fudge bar left in it, and I took that. Even though it wasn't nearly as special as the Klondike Crunch or the Blue Bunny chocolate dipped chocolate vanilla swirl. Because then I could take the empty box out of the freezer. It makes perfect sense, right? Making room in the freezer, 90 cubic inches, is more important than my self-indulgent pleasure. A box with one fudge bar left is inelegant, unorderly. It's a depressing reminder that the universe tends toward decay and disintegration. Now I have room to put the new treats on the proper shelf with the other ice cream. They weren't happy next to the TV dinners. I have the tactile pleasure of opening the other end of the box, flattening it just so, and placing it in the recycle. It reminds me of my father, who showed me how to fold and flatten the empty milk cartons, and got angry when I didn't do it the way he wanted, when I was a mere stripling of 52. It's an archetypal experience. What Klondike Crunch could measure up to that? Two more for this portion of the show. This is called epitechiophobia. Noun, from the Greek, epitechia, which means success, and phobia, which means fear. Fear of success. It's a shapeshifter, the monster in the closet. I never know what it will look like. If I finish something, it'll be done, just when I was getting good at it. If I perform, my father brags on me, makes me feel like a trained SEAL. When I get A's, my father gives me love, which only reminds me what happens when I get a B. I follow my bliss. My father sucks the air out of it, warns me I'd better have a backup when I fall on my ass. I look for gigs on cruise ships. My father says, "You mean if someone offered you an accounting job, you wouldn't take it?" I promote myself, blow my own horn. It fills me with dread. Being conceited is a sin. And if I do become a success, you'll want to get next to me. Sooner or later, you'll pull back the curtain and find a hot air balloon man. My father gave up his architectural practice after only 6 years, worked for the school district until he retired. He drives me to succeed to atone for his failure. But my success would humiliate him, so he has to cut me down again. So I've become my own best saboteur, a Sisyphus who throws his rock down the mountain. My father raised a push-me-pull-me. By the way, epitechiophobia isn't really a word, I just made it up. And this is villain L number 2. "We used to let you cry yourself to sleep," my father, with a little chuckle, said. "It felt like being buried 6 feet deep. The child inside me is not allowed to weep. It lays inside a coffin in my head. You used to let me cry myself to sleep. Encased in blackness, sobbing in a heap, I can't perceive the world outside my bed. It feels like being buried 6 feet deep. You brat, I told you, not another peep. Don't let me catch you getting out of bed. I don't care if you cry yourself to sleep. And if I die before I wake from sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to take," he said, "as though I might be buried 6 feet deep. This sinkhole in my heart is mine to keep and pass on to my children when I'm dead. It used to let me cry myself to sleep, tucked underneath the covers 6 feet deep." Thank you. Let's take a break.